Okay, we're live. I don't think anybody's watching, but we're live. Okay, hi, I'm Meta Spencer, and I'm really looking forward to today's conversation with Brent Costanz, who's in California, and who is the CEO of a company called Blue Planet. And what he does is make limestone for concrete. So we need to talk about that because it could be a very, very important way of helping to overcome our climate crisis. So good morning, Brent. How are you?
Good morning, Meta. Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you. I'm looking forward to finding out more about this process, which is all, because I don't have a background in science, so you're going to have to sort of ease me through this. Okay, so tell me what you do. You're trying to emulate seashells and corals, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. We use mineralization processes to capture CO2 and mineralize it into limestone, and then we use the limestone as the main constituent of concrete, which is the most used building material in the world. And it's important to think about it in terms of the quantitative size of the problem with climate change and how much CO2 there is and what we're going to do with all that CO2 to keep it out of the atmosphere. There are about 55 billion tons of rock mined every year worldwide. And we call it a billion tons a gigaton. And there's 1,000 megatons, which is 1 million tons, in 1 gigaton, which is 1 billion tons. So I'll use these terms megaton and gigaton.
Let me get, I'm glad you do this. This is very helpful. Megaton and gigaton. A megaton is 1 million and a gigaton is 1 billion.
Correct.
Tons. All right, got it. What's a trillion?
That's a bigger number. I mean, a bigger word. Let's see, what do we use? I can't remember right now.
You don't use it for things like rock.
But there are about 55 gigatons of rock mined every year. And they're paid for already. And there's already logistical systems to move them around through ports using barges and trains and trucks and everything. And the other number to think about is that humans put about 40 gigatons of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere every year. So we mined 55 gigatons of rock, and we put about 40 gigatons of CO2 into the atmosphere. And one of the big issues about climate change is a lot of folks can't perceive how large the problem really is. It's in the gigaton scale. It's not in the megaton scale. And most climate modelers believe that we need to mitigate about 10 gigatons of CO2 going to the atmosphere every year. So of that 40 gigatons that we're putting out every year, we need to mitigate at least 10 of those, at least a quarter of all the CO2 right now. We need
now when you say mitigate, what does that mean in this case?
Keep it out of the atmosphere.
Means keep it out before. I make a distinction in my own mind between whether you're keeping it from going out in the first place or whether you're capturing it while it's already out there and bringing it back. The latter I think they call negative emissions technology, right? But what we normally hear all about is the former, which is don't let it out. Capture it before it gets away, right? Or don't even create the stuff that would emit it, right?
Yeah.
Now, when you say mitigate, which is it, or both?
It's really both, and I'm not sure it really is helpful to make that distinction. Although a lot of the accountants who are interested in financial benefit from carbon accounting make that designation. But in reality, as a scientist, there's no difference between a CO2 molecule that came out of a flue stack and goes into the atmosphere, they all mix together. We have a way to tell the difference. We can use something called stable isotopes, and we can tell you where that CO2 molecule came from. Did it come from the atmosphere, or did it come from the burning of fossil fuel? But yeah, the whole field is a little distracted, but it's not because of the science or to actually help climate change. It's because there are these carbon registries and regulatory financial incentives to count carbon. And
these
right
offset things, they call them offsets, right?
Yeah, right now it's more fashionable to pay for offsets from carbon removal than it is to pay for offsets from mitigation of CO2. But in terms of helping our grandchildren, that's sort of a distraction. You know, it doesn't have anything to do with really fighting climate change or removing CO2. You know, there's a process called direct air capture that some people work on, which pulls it from the atmosphere. But you know, the direct air capture companies all want to locate near a power plant because there's more CO2 to capture in the air near a power plant than out in the desert. You know, so it's kind of silly,
That's
actually.
interesting. Okay, that's kind of inside scoop, isn't it? That you know that, but I mean, it would be why not just attach it to the smokestack? I mean, if they're trying to capture CO2 close to the place where it's being emitted, that they call it something different, direct air capture, but it's maybe the idea is the same as behind the capture of it as it comes out.
Yeah, I mean, is it when it's 1 millimeter out of the flue stack, does that make it air? You know, or 1 meter, or a mile, or you know, or down halfway down the flue stack, because it's all post combustion, you know, coming up the flue stack. It's you know, I mean, for example, on the voluntary carbon market, Microsoft only buys what's classified as removal. You know, even though it's the same thing, you know, when they file a press release, it looks better for them, you know, but it has nothing to do with fighting climate change or improving things at all. It's just, it's all about these voluntary markets that are developing, you know, and we've seen that for decades in things like biofuels. You know, if you take a plant that took a year to grow, and then you combust it to make heat, and that CO2 goes into the atmosphere, they call that a negative emission, because and if you then capture it, because you know the plant pulled the CO2 out of the atmosphere, and then when you combusted the plant, the CO2 went back into the atmosphere and replaced it. And then instead of letting that CO2 back into the atmosphere, if you capture it, they call that a negative emission. You know, but if I go to, say, a 2,000-year-old bristlecone pine tree, you know, that captured that CO2 2 millennia ago, and then I combust that bristlecone pine tree, is that a fossil fuel? Or is that bioenergy? You know, it's all arbitrary.
I'm stuck with, let me play with that. Why would anybody call it a fossil fuel?
Because it captured the CO2 2 millennia ago. See, the whole basis of bioenergy is that it's pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere to grow the plant, right? And then when you combust it, that CO2 just goes right back into the atmosphere. And so you're not net adding CO2 as you would from, say, something that captured the CO2 like coal.
Okay, but okay, suppose this bristlecone captured CO2 2,000 years ago that had come out of a volcano. You wouldn't call that a fossil fuel, but it would have been if it came out of a fire that used some gas leak or something. Is that this is all a weird line of thinking to me.
Yeah, so it got us a little off track, but in general, I'm just pointing out that designating carbon removed versus mitigated is not a useful tool in helping fight climate change. It's only useful for the monetary systems of carbon counting and advertising and that kind of thing.
Okay, fair
because,
enough. And for me, I have to admit that's kind of a new insight because I just wrote a long article about what I call how to subtract. And it was about technologies that actually take CO2 or any kind of greenhouse gas out of the atmosphere. And I was arguing that we need more technologies of that kind because we can't get along with simply trying, it's not enough to simply stop the emissions, which is all that we hear people talk about. I mean, that's the thing that kind of bugs me. The people that are environmentalists and climate change enthusiasts who say, we don't want anybody to know that we can actually suck it out of the atmosphere because that would give them an excuse for going ahead and emitting it. And we want to pretend that they mustn't put it out there. So we don't want them to think that we could get it. And that drives me crazy. So,
well, we're miles away from just getting what's being put into the atmosphere. I mean, that would be a nice problem to have if we'd already tackled that problem. But that is the big problem. But it's true, the IPCC and a lot of people have concluded that in addition to that, after we do that, we also do need to remove some from the atmosphere as well. Right now, there's no technology that exists that can do that without putting more CO2 into the atmosphere than it takes out. But maybe someday there will be.
Well, that's very interesting that you say there's none, because that is quite a blow to, that's a very horrible statement. Because I was thinking, well, we have to do it. And the question is, which of these, I wrote a paper in which I said here are 12 different technologies that do something like that. And which one is the best? But you're saying they don't, any of them work.
Well, you have to.
Right off the bat, you want to say immediately that it would cost too much. I know that's true for a direct air capture, that that's going to probably not be economically. I mean, you can't get ahead that way. But is that true for everything, including yours?
No, we don't. Ours is quite different than anything like direct air capture. Anytime you look at a technology like that, any of these, the fundamental question you have to ask is it actually going to net remove CO2 from the atmosphere, or is it going to put more CO2 just operating the machinery and then you actually take out?
And are you saying that's true of everyone that you know of?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know of a single direct air capture method that, unless you play some shell game like, use renewable energy that would have gone onto the grid and displaced fossil fuel power or something like that, they could operate, and actually put less CO2 into the atmosphere than it's actually absorbing. You have to.
Now, let's talk about weathering of rock and this thing about these guys who want to put olivine all over beaches, because I mean they believe that they can, dig up the olivine, crush it, and transport it and sprinkle it, and do that with less carbon emissions than they're going to absorb by having this green stuff all over the place.
Yeah. So the grinding and mining and transport of all that rock, you have to look at the carbon footprint and the amount of energy it takes to do that. That only works if the rock is finely powdered with a high surface area. And even then, these mafic and ultramafic rocks, aren't available broadly, all around the world. That's a natural process, which is always going. But you're not going to go suddenly take gigaton levels of CO2 out of the atmosphere. You're not going to net out. All these geoengineering things are interesting, but the actual practicality, you have to ask that fundamental question: are you going to take more CO2 out of the atmosphere than you're going to create or not? That's the fundamental question. What we're doing at Blue Planet is different, because there's already 55 gigatons of rock being mined and moved every year. So we're stepping into an existing mass material movement, which is already the largest on the planet, other than water. And we're
Now,
not.
this isn't, I'm thinking of concrete because I know that's where we're going to go. But you made me think about other uses for rock. I had a relative who got very, very rich with a company that he created to create gravel and put it on. He used to sell most of the gravel for roads around Southwest U.S.
Yeah.
Now that is, I presume they get big chunks of rock and smash it to make the gravel, or do you sometimes find places where it's already gravel?
Yeah, there's different occurrences. You've heard of pebbles from rivers.
No, what do you call them?
Have you ever looked at a river? The rock in the bottom of the river, they're pebbles.
Yes, they're rounded.
Yeah, they're rounded. Yeah, that's a very common type of rock. That you don't have to grind up or.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, sometimes it's made that way. Of the 55 gigatons, some of it is used for what you're calling, is used for road base. It's also used in asphalt. Most of it's used in concrete. But it's used in all those places. What's important is there's a market already around the world in poor countries and rich countries for rock. And it doesn't require a subsidy or anything. All countries are purchasing rock for all their projects, and about 40% of all the concrete that's purchased globally is purchased by governments. And so,
because they'd be making roads mostly, right?
Roads and buildings and dams and bridges, and concrete is the most used building material in the world by far.
Right.
And about 80% of the mass of concrete is the gravel, the sand and coarse gravel that goes into it. So it's one of the big issue with carbon dioxide, whether we want to say we're removing it or mitigating it, is what to do with it. And, schemes like, purifying it, which takes a lot of energy, and transporting it in pipelines and then injecting it underground are the main approach that's been taken the last couple of decades. What we're doing is different. We convert it. We use technology based on biomineralization, how shells form, to form it into limestone. And limestone is about 44% by mass CO2. So if I have a ton of limestone, I have about 440 kilograms of CO2 that is permanently crystalline, in the crystalline form as calcite, usually, the mineral you brought up. And already 71% of all the aggregate used in concrete is mined limestone anyway. So it's not a technological change to use limestone. And what it does is it makes the built environment where we're going to store all the CO2. And so when we build a building, instead of it having a huge carbon footprint related to all the concrete, because concrete has a large carbon footprint because of the cement in it, now it becomes a carbon sink. And the built environment becomes where we're going to store all the CO2.
Yeah. Well, that is obviously a brilliant solution if you can do that. And you're the only person I've come across who thinks he knows how to do it. So why don't you tell us what the whole procedure is step by step?
Sure. If you go to our plant on San Francisco Bay, where we made the concrete that we used to build Terminal 1 at San Francisco International Airport, what you'll see is we're located next to a natural gas-fired power plant, which puts out, if it's running all the time, about 2 million tons of CO2 a year. We have what's called an absorber, where we contact the raw flue gas that
Excuse me, I'm back here with this power plant. What kind of power plant is it? What does it use for fuel?
Natural gas-fired power plant.
Okay. Okay.
It powers
So
most of the
they're going to keep on using natural gas for a while in California, right?
Well, the more renewable we build, the more natural gas plants we need, because when it's not sunny or the wind's not blowing, uh, we need to back it up with a type of controllable energy that we can power up and power down, whether it's sunny or windy or not, or cloudy or whatever. So we're going to 50% renewable. So we have to really have a strong natural gas fleet to complement that.
Will the time ever come when you won't be using natural gas in California at all?
Yeah, when we get what's called utility scale battery storage, so that, when we have a peak during the day where we can't use all that renewable energy, we'll have be able to store the energy at a utility scale. We're not there yet, although we do have the largest battery storage unit in the world here in California, but we're still a long way away from being able to balance the grid. But
at that point, you'll have to find some other way of capturing CO2 because
well,
your neighbor won't be doing it.
Yeah, right. It won't be generated. I mean, there's so much CO2 everywhere. A lot of people think long term. We need to focus on what we call the hard to decarbonize sectors, which are steel, cement, oil refining, hydrogen production, things like that. And hopefully renewable power will overtake coal and gas, and, we'll have all renewable power, and we'll power electric cars with that as well. But, there's only one way to make cement and steel, and it's hard to decarbonize those.
Now that's why I wanted to talk to you though, because I got the impression, well, I'm deflecting you from the task I just assigned you to explain the whole step, but I got the impression that well, that you know how to create cement that's negative, that's emission negative, that you actually don't heat this, like make Portland cement, you have to create a lot of heat to do it, right? And you generate CO2, and that you have got a way of avoiding that part of it, because that's the really bad part of making concrete, isn't it? That you have to generate so much CO2 in making the cement part.
Yeah, I did that about 20 years ago in my career. I have about 150 patents, US issued patents on cement. And I did build a big plant in California on another large power plant, the largest power plant on the West Coast. And we captured CO2 and made it into cement. Because my history is, the first part of my career, I made bone cement for orthopedic surgery. So I'm a cement expert. Most operating rooms that do orthopedic surgery have one or two of my cements for bone fractures in it. But around 2006, I produced cement, and we redid parts of Highway 1 in California with it. What I learned from that experience was that there's only about 2 or 3 billion tons of cement produced annually every year globally, compared to the 40 billion tons of CO2 that the humans are putting out. And I wanted to have a larger impact than just fixing cement. And I also learned that getting a new cement into the building codes is a multi-decade process for a good reason. Because cement's a very reactive material and all that. Whereas getting a new aggregate, sand and gravel is not a big process at all. It's easily tested and introduced into it. So, and there's 55 billion tons of aggregate made. So what I learned was, if we really want to go out and make a big impact on climate change, cement is not the place to go. Really? You want to have somewhere where you can sequester and store permanently a whole lot of CO2, which is rock is the perfect, carrier for that, to store that much CO2.
Okay, so I'm wrong. My impression was, okay, you got aggregate, you got cement, you put them together, that makes concrete, right?
Right.
Now, but the cement is a place that generates that they worry about. That's the biggest source of CO2 emissions for the whole concrete is the cement part.
That's correct. So if you look at a typical, and I'll use imperial terms, a cubic yard of concrete, it has about 600 pounds of cement in it. And so it has a carbon footprint of that yard of about 600 pounds.
So why did you say that the cement part isn't as good a way of making a difference as the aggregate part?
Because that same yard of concrete has about 1,200 pounds of sand and about 1,500 pounds of gravel in it. Okay, so almost, or 1,800 pounds of gravel, so almost 3,000 pounds of sand, limestone, sand, and gravel. And remember, we said 44% of the mass of the limestone is CO2. So,
but the CO2 is, oh, you mean because it's containing and sequestering CO2.
Correct.
You can sequester it, even though in making it, you also put some out with the production of the cement.
Correct. Yeah.
So that's where I'm stuck, is why you don't think the cement production is the important thing. Actually, the reason I wanted to talk to you was just to get straightened out on that, because
so if you do the math, and 44% of the 3,000 pounds, right, is like over 1,300 pounds of CO2. So that offsets the 600 pounds of cement. So now that cubic yard is negative 700 pounds. I've actually got carbon negative concrete. And so I'm not saying it's not worthwhile. The way to deal with the cement problem, rather than make a new cement like I've done in the past successfully, logistically, it turns out it's better to go to the cement plant and just capture the CO2 when it comes out the flue stack, rather than trying to make a new cement. And in that case, you can have a zero carbon cement. And if you add to that carbon sequestered sand and gravel, you can have very carbon negative concrete if you do both of those things. I'm just saying, instead of making a new cement like I've done in the past and trying to get that through the codes, all you really need to do is go to cement plants and capture the CO2 coming out of the plant.
Why you say there's a good reason for them to be suspicious or careful and not allowing new types of cement to be used? What is there that's risky about? I mean, why can't you figure that out and everybody be satisfied with the answer within a month of research?
Well, I guess it goes back to my orthopedic surgery background. In orthopedic surgery, if we didn't have 10-year follow-up on patients, you really couldn't get a new therapy approved by the FDA. The same's true with building bridges. You don't just come out with a new cement and go build a bridge with it, because it could fall down and kill a lot of people. So there's a lot of important testing. And you know this from your own experience. If you take a sack of cement and leave it on the floor in your garage through the winter, and you come in the spring, it'll be hard, right? There's different setting times, different, cement has to get to the same strength in March as it does in October, and all that has to be tested. Cement's an unstable material by nature. And so new cements have never fared very well. But
they made the Romans apparently made the best cement anybody's ever done. They put the Pantheon or something made of cement, and it's brilliant.
Yeah, it's very nice pozzolanic materials, and the Egyptians and even the New World pyramids were made out of concrete. And
you're kidding.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. But the take-home point from all that is that there's a lot of solutions out there. Some of them are going to be ready for prime time in 2050. Some of them might be ready for prime time in 2040. Some of them may not be ready to really scale up, to really make an impact till 2070, like the Chinese are saying. And what we really need to focus on today are things that can be implemented before 2030. you know, and
Absolutely. Yeah.
one of the few things that is of scale and ready to do that is what Blue Planet's doing, because all the infrastructure to move all this rock around and move the raw materials and capture CO2 already exists. And it takes decades to get all the, you know, for example, with geologic sequestration of CO2 in the US, you have to get what's called a class 6 well permit. You have to go to a subsurface geologic site. You have to drill, you have to do seismic, you have to look at the water, you know, you have to go through all the bureaucracy. You know, that takes 5 years minimum. It has to be financed, constructed, built. So you're out 10 years at least to try and develop even a 1 megaton geologic reservoir. You have to rent the pore space, all the contracts, you know, it's a huge expensive effort, and it never produces any revenue unless you get subsidies for it, you know, and you don't even know if the subsidies are still going to be there in 10 years, you know. With what Blue Planet's doing, you know, we make the rock in, you know, an hour, and you know, it can go.
But you can do it in a way that's convincing to the building code guys that it's going to hold up and all that. You don't have to test it the way you'd have to test cement.
It still has a lot of testing, but no, you don't have to go out multiple decades.
Okay, well, I back there a while ago, I asked you to tell it from the start what this whole procedure is. So then I kept you from doing it. So go back and do it.
Sure. If you go to our plant, which is a subsidiary of Blue Planet called San Francisco Bay Aggregates, which is on a deep water port next to a large power plant, the first thing you'd see are what are called absorbers. And this is where you contact the flue gas that would have gone into the atmosphere with a solution, a capture solution. And what these absorbers are gas liquid contactors, where the gas and the liquid are mixed, and the CO2 is absorbed from the gas into the liquid and goes from carbon dioxide to carbonate.
Okay, hold on. I'm trying to visualize this. We got a port here, and what do these things look like, and how are they used? I'm not clear about these things.
Yeah, well, it's like a tall, hollow cylinder, you know, maybe 10 meters tall and 4 meters in diameter, like a big pipe.
Okay.
And at the top of the pipe, a liquid is introduced. And at the bottom of the pipe, a gas is introduced. And in the pipe are a lot of what are called media. You know, they look like little jacks, things that interrupt the water flow. And so the water that's coming down and dribbling down through has all this gas coming up through it to increase the surface area of the two interacting. And so what comes out of there is now a carbonate solution. That carbonate solution is then mixed with a calcium bearing solution, which we get from returned and demolished concrete, where we dissolve the calcium out of returned and demolished concrete to make calcium.
Demolished concrete it sounds like you've got a new word for concrete made from like something like the shells of mollusks.
No, just, you know, when buildings fall down or you build a new building, you demolish the building. So we call it demolished concrete.
Oh, I thought you said mollusks. Like, so I had seashells in this thing. All right. So
Yeah.
Demolished concrete. So old waste concrete you use. Okay.
And that's where we get our calcium. And we make calcium carbonate, and our technology allows us to turn it into a limestone rock very quickly, in minutes.
Minutes, really?
And it's akin to, you know, when a lobster sheds its skeleton, and then it has to remineralize in a very short period of time so it doesn't get preyed upon.
I actually don't know that, but and now you've told me that it's true. All right.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so if you're a lobster, the way you grow since you have an exoskeleton is you jettison the whole skeleton and you get out of it. So that when you see that dried lobster skeleton on the beach,
Uh-huh.
that's not a dead lobster, that's just a molt. It molted
Really?
its old skeleton. But because of, they're out in the world, because of predation, they have to remineralize it, a larger one, very fast, or else they'll get eaten.
Yeah.
So it's akin to that kind of process. And
And how fast can they do it, and how fast can you do it?
we can do it a little faster than they can do it, but it takes them a few hours, which is really remarkable. And that's why we call our process biomimetic. It's copying a biologic process. We make it in both sand and gravel size, and it allows us to make the concrete that it's used in carbon negative, net sequestering CO2, even if it had regular cement in it, because we're putting in way more CO2 than that cement emitted. But at the same time, if you go to the cement plant and capture the CO2, it's even more carbon negative. And the Canadian Standard Association has actually now issued a specification that provides a way to describe the carbon balance in a cubic yard of concrete. And you can go to carbonstar.org. It's like Energy Star, but instead of describing the energy efficiency, what it describes is the embodied energy or the embodied carbon in a cubic yard of concrete. Mm-hmm. And the Canadian Standard Association is sort of the premier international organization that houses these standards. For example, they house the standard for geologic sequestration of CO2. So it allows, like I was mentioning, we did the Terminal 1 port at San Francisco Airport. They actually specified, how carbon negative they wanted the concrete. It's part of the purchase.
Okay, wait a minute. I hate to interrupt you, but I used to live in Berkeley and for 20 something years. And I haven't been back very often. So when you're referring to Terminal 1, obviously they must have built a new terminal that I'm not aware of. Yeah, I haven't flown into San Francisco in ages. So you're talking about what? When was this new terminal built?
2015. There's 3 domestic terminals, 1, 2, and 3, plus a big international terminal. There's more building going on.
Well, airports are always under construction. Every airport in the world is still under construction. I think you go around and around on these driveways. So I didn't know that. So they specified that they wanted carbon negative concrete.
Right.
And they knew that there was such a thing, because I had, you're the first people that I've ever heard of who claim to have carbon negative concrete.
Yeah, well, we don't actually advertise very much because there's so much demand for what we're doing. Literally, there are hundreds of requests for projects, and we're sort of proactively focusing on really interesting projects like SFO. Some of the large social media companies have carbon negative objectives here in Silicon Valley. But we're going to start talking more publicly about what we're doing. The problem is, people see an interview like this and then they call us up and they want to do a project and they're in Florida or something, and you don't ship rock across the country, it's just local.
Okay, I have to apologize for any slight publicity that I might pile on you and make trouble for you. But it was somebody else that I know you didn't advertise. I had a little trouble even finding where you were located, because it seemed to be that you have sort of sites in various places. But anyway, I'm glad to have found you. And I apologize if I make trouble by letting people know that you exist.
Well, things are changing a little. We're signing agreements with large organizations that have a large number of emitters. You know, they may own many, many plants. And, you know, we believe there's about 5,000 places around the world that emit more than 500,000 tons of CO2 from a point. And we don't think we can, you know, address all those ourselves. So publicly, you can see we have an agreement with Mitsubishi Corporation, and we're making plans to branch out at many, many plants around China. You can see that.
Okay, now wait a minute. You're going to put in Blue Planet installations around power plants in China.
I didn't say power plants, but there may be some power plants, maybe some
Okay,
plants,
all right.
steel mills, ethanol refineries. We're even doing some direct air capture, because we have other methods of doing it that actually are carbon negative, you know, where we don't waste a lot of energy trying to make pure CO2.
Really? Because the only two direct air capture outfits that I know about are David Keith's thing in British Columbia, and this thing called Climeworks, which is, I think, is in Switzerland and Iceland. But you have a different technology?
Yeah, the problem is, you know, and it sort of goes back because a lot of this idea came out of the oil industry, where, you know, they needed pure CO2 to inject into oil wells to get more oil out, and called it enhanced oil recovery. So the Department of Energy sort of got fixated on, you know, making CO2 into 100% pure liquid so it could be injected into oil wells. Because if it's not 100% pure, you can't liquefy it, right? So the atmosphere is about 0.04% CO2, 400 parts per million. You know, whereas what comes out of, say, a coal-fired power plant is more like 150,000 parts per million, or 15%. But that's still not good enough to liquefy. And so most of the technology around carbon, like direct air capture and other methods, have the goal of producing pure CO2 so they can be put in pipelines and liquefied. And that takes an enormous amount of energy and capital costs, which is why anytime you are starting with pure CO2, you pretty much lost the battle before you even started, you know. And you know, for our process, one thing that about the absorption step is we're not at any time trying to form pure CO2, because we're just converting it into a carbonate solution. And so for much, much lower energy, we can capture the CO2 from air without trying to purify it and take it to the next step.
So how do you capture it?
Same way I explained. You know, a gas goes through
With those pipe things.
yeah, absorbers, yeah.
But that's capturing it at the site. I thought you were saying that is, you're right by a power plant, or you're right by a place that's emitting
Right.
it.
Yeah,
So that's what you're doing. You're capturing it as it comes out, or as it's before it gets ambient.
No, I'm just saying we can take it from any concentration. So we can take it from the atmosphere, we can take it from a flue stack. You know, we're not trying to form pure CO2. We're not trying to form a liquid that we can compress and pump around. We just don't do that. And that's, you know, but that's what carbon engineering and Climeworks and, you know, whatever their name, you know, global thermostat, you know, they're all trying to, all the direct air capture companies are trying to form pure CO2. And then
some of them want to make it into fuel. I think the
yeah.
bio thing does, engineering wants to make it into some sort of fuel.
Yeah, and if that's the cheapest, best way to make fuel, that's great. But you know, the world doesn't need as much biofuel as the amount of CO2 we have to mitigate, right? The world does need that much rock, though.
And you can do it without, and it's carbon neutral at best, or at least, and maybe carbon negative when you make it.
Exactly.
Impressive. Oh, okay. Great. Now, okay, now you started at the top. You had me on the San Francisco Bay, and there's a terminal, and you got this stuff. Go on. I'm trying to follow your process.
Yeah. Well, we distribute the rock just like mined rock. It's just the difference is mined rock usually comes from very long distances. For example, in the Bay Area, a lot of the rock comes from British Columbia.
Really?
Yeah, it's barged down. And it's harder
Is
and
it
harder.
so scarce that's where they have to get it, or?
Yeah, it's harder and harder to get a quarry permitted. California, and the actual distance that rock is moved has gone from about 30 to about 50 miles just in the last 10 years.
Well, I've heard that sand is scarce, that the world doesn't have enough sand.
That's also true, yeah.
Is that part of the same problem, or is that a totally different issue, getting sand from getting as distinct from getting crushed rock?
Sand's often mined on beaches or like in North San Francisco Bay, they'll dredge it, and it's mainly, people just don't want to keep doing that. It's an environmentally destructive process, but even India, with the Gang River and everything is short on sand, and they're actually grinding up rock to make sand.
Really?
Yeah. And there's a global sand shortage even in the Middle East, because most of the sand in the Middle East is what we call aeolian. It's windblown sand, so it's very fine. It's not of the size that it's used in concrete.
But how much of concrete in the world uses sand?
100%.
They have to have sand as well as gravel.
Yeah.
I know that.
Okay. And mortar has no gravel in it, just sand.
Okay. Okay. So I keep distracting you. Go on.
Well, I think that the point is simply that what drives developing plants is offtake. Someone who's going to use the rock, and fortunately, most of the world uses rock. Every place that has people is pouring concrete. Mm-hmm. And over 40% of that is purchased by governments. And so this is probably the most effective way that governments actually have to mitigate CO2, is not through tariffs or taxes or subsidies. It's actually through their procurement power to provide a credit-worthy off-taker to provide the project financing for these kind of plants. And it's something every country in the world can do. Poor countries, rich countries. The problem with the putting a price on carbon is it induces the formation of businesses like direct air capture companies that really only exist because they're going to get a subsidy. If there was no subsidy, there'd be nothing to draw. They couldn't exist. And the fact is, over 90% of the world is never going to have subsidies. They're never going to have subsidies for carbon in India or Indonesia, the fourth largest country in the world. They tried it and it failed. And so it's really leading us down the wrong pathway to think that we can build significant carbon mitigation methods based on government subsidies. There's too much CO2 to pay people to stop polluting. You have to create actual prosperous business around it. They'll be taken over, and it can be still driven by governments, but rather than through subsidies, through procurement preferences. And here in California, we have something called the Buy Clean legislation. The state of California, if it were a country, it'd be like, the fifth or largest country in the world or something, like that. It's one of the largest concrete procurers in the world. We're building a high-speed rail that's going to be one of the largest concrete projects, ever. And
well, if it finishes, yeah. I've heard bad things about it. It doesn't look like it has a future.
Yeah, but it's going to be a lot of concrete. And
well, I'm sorry, but no, really, are they ever going to finish that thing?
I don't know.
Because I've heard that they can't, because the owners of land won't sell rights to go through their land. And I don't know why they can't just use eminent domain, but anyway, that's a different thing. You think they will finish, you're talking about it as if it's a real project. I've heard it described as a failed project.
Yeah, I don't know. They've built about a couple 100 miles of it, and I know they're already building more of it because we've been involved in the process. Whether it'll all get built and when, I'm not really aware. But the point is simply that, governments all over the world using this buy clean mechanism. And this is actually, the Biden administration just released information yesterday about some of the new specifics of the infrastructure spending. And they talk about buy clean mechanisms.
And now they have some measure for how much carbon is in every product that a government might want to procure.
Right, and that's
what say you can tell which ones are the ones you should buy and which ones not.
Yeah, that's what the Carbon Star standard does. So if you go to carbonstar.org and go to the Canadian Standard Association and you look at that, that's specifically what Carbon Star is for.
I never heard of Carbon Star. STAR?
Yeah.
Or STAR. Okay, I'll look it up. Okay, so yeah, you don't have trouble convincing me that this is a smart thing. In fact, my concern is, how come everybody in the world isn't doing it big time right now? You say you're in business with China. You're going to put some stuff going on it. Tell me about how fast you can expand this, because I would say, if you're right, concrete, real concrete, usable concrete in buildings and roads can be negative, and you are making it negative, then nobody should buy anything except what you produce.
Yeah, I think that was one of the key points that we tried to make in Glasgow was, there's a lot of great approaches out there, but we need 20, 30 approaches, things that can happen in 5 years. And I think that's what we've demonstrated here in San Francisco. In less than 5 years, we've gone from, purchasing the land, going through the permitting process, getting it financed, construction, operation, to a plant.
And it's one plant near the San Francisco Bay, and you're producing enough material for people to build an airport.
Well, yeah, in a broad sense, but the point.
And more now.
Yeah, and the point is, it's not a 10-year process or a 20-year process or a 30 or 40 or 50-year process. It's a 5-year solution. So if we start in 2022, in plants in China, and by 2027, there'll be a lot of operating plants in China.
How many?
Well, one of the companies we're working with has 400 plants, and things happen in China pretty quickly. But I think,
can they make that many? How difficult is it to build your plant, the kind of plant that you use to create this concrete?
Well, it's taken us.
Hi, go on. How you can do? You did it, one of them, in 5 years or less, right? And got it going.
Right.
So they could do it again in less time in China, for hundreds of them. Probably,
yeah.
Good for you. Good for you. Wow. That would be a huge contribution. And now make sure everybody knows about this, because nobody should be using anything else right now.
Yeah. Well, like I said, aggregate is something you don't transport a long way. So, we usually think in the terms of about 100-mile radius around one plant for moving it. And so, what we've learned is we have to be careful not to get people too excited. If we're not currently. If we're not currently
excited, and I don't want to apologize for it. You're thrilling me.
Yeah, because it's hard to explain, but we're a small company and we get overwhelmed by calls from the outside. I have some people that just deal with all the incoming, and
Are
we
there other people in competition with you?
not yet. I mean,
Really? No other company pretends to do what you're doing.
well, a friend of mine has a company, and what he does is kind of interesting. He gets purified CO2, from Air Liquide or Praxair or Air Products, these companies that have been in the gas market for a long time. And what he does is he perfumes the liquefied concrete with the CO2. And a lot of it gets absorbed into the concrete. And it would be like what your friend in Iceland's doing, sort of, it sort of mineralizes and it helps it cure. And so he's only able to get about 1 or 2%, whereas we get like, 40%, but he's only able to get 1 or 2% absorption of the CO2. But what he is able to do is he's able to use less Portland cement because normally to get concrete to cure fast, you use more cement in the mix design. And so he can use less. And so his claim is his concrete is more lower carbon, because he doesn't use as much cement in it. Originally, when he founded the company, the idea was we were going to store all the CO2, and then it was realized only 1% or 2% actually gets absorbed. But he was able to have this other benefit, of lowering the amount of Portland cement. And he's also a Canadian. He's from Nova Scotia.
Okay. What's his company? I'll look it up.
It's called Carbon Cure.
Okay. Yeah, this woman yesterday mentioned it. So
Yeah.
she's heard of it. Okay. So now I've also heard that steel slag can be used. There's some process similar to what you're doing with waste concrete that they use steel slag for. Does that sound familiar to you?
Yeah, he's a young Canadian again guy. He wanted to come out to Stanford and do a postdoc with me a few years ago, but he met a guy that had been successful in the solar industry, and they formed a company. And what they do is they take steel slag, which is what's left out over, from steel making, which has a lot of calcium in it, a lot of calcium oxide. So it's very basic, kind of like concrete. And they infuse it with flue gas, that has CO2 in it. And they only make what we call concrete products, like blocks and pavers and things like that. Mm-hmm. And so the idea is you're going to take all this slag that's on, is it Lake Ontario, where they have all those steel mills, and form them into blocks, and then infuse them with CO2 gas, and they'll harden up. And so that's sort of an interesting process. Again, it's not going to result in gigaton levels of.
But yours will, and pardon me for feeling excited because you're modest. I think that's just terrific, and I really, really hope you succeed very, very much. I want to see your name up in lights, and saving China would be a good start. So the question is, can you get publicity or something and make deals with other companies around the world so that everybody can start making plants just like yours right away? Okay?
Yeah, that hasn't been the problem. We're up to our ears in negotiations right now. But
so do you project that within 15 years, a lot of the concrete in the world will be your concrete?
Yeah, well, when I'm trying to convince the concrete industry as a whole, which is really the building industry, that the biggest contribution they can make is not necessarily just to make lower carbon products, but is to take everybody else's CO2 and let the built environment become where we store it.
Absolutely. It's beautiful. Okay, thank you so much. This has been fascinating and very heartening. Good luck to you.